Hi everyone, it's Kelly here. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time, welcome back. If you've been before, lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books. Hopefully you can hear me, because as you can see behind me is the ocean. I am currently on holidays. The sound of the ocean waves crashing is somewhat loud, so hopefully you can hear me over the top of it. Yeah, I'm on holidays and I had hoped to record this video before I left for my trip, but I didn't get a chance. So here I am, and I'm going to be recording my wrap up for the month of June. So I have my iPad here with my notes about the books. I do not have the books with me because, as I said, I'm on holidays. I did not want to bring my stack of June reads that I'd already read with me when I had other important packing to do, like the books I wanted to read while I'm on my trip. So here we go. Let's start with the first book that I read in June, and that is Entos by Isabella Hammad. And I listened to the audiobook of this, which was narrated by Nadia Albina. I really enjoyed this book. This was, it's a book that is set in Israel and Palestine, so obviously a very timely read. It was also nominated for the Women's Prize and shortlisted, and so that was the reason that I sort of picked it up. But yeah, it was a super timely read, and it's all about a woman who lives in the UK but has a Palestinian background, and she is visiting her sister who lives in Israel, so she's come over for a visit. She's an actress, the woman from the UK, and she is drawn in to perform in an Arabic performance of Hamlet, which is a sort of fascinating concept. And it took my head a little bit of time to kind of get around the idea of this play being performed on the West Bank in Arabic, but the way that the book is laid out, it kind of steps you through. So I was able to kind of get my head around it as we went along. So yeah, it was a poignant read for me, and I also read it alongside Doppelganger, which I will get to in 2 books' time, and that was also a good pairing in terms of the reading, and I'll explain why when I get to Doppelganger. The ending was a little bit ambiguous, which I would have preferred it to be less ambiguous, but otherwise this was super enjoyable for me. So it was a 4-star read. I really, really enjoyed it. The second book that I finished in June is A Short History of Tractors in Ukrainian by Marina, Lewycka. This was a book I was reading for my Around the World Reading Challenge, and although the author, I believe, lives in the UK, she is of Ukrainian descent. So this was a book all about 2 sisters, and I believe, so there's Nadezhda, but I think she goes by, if memory serves, it's Nadia, and the other sister is Vera, or Vera. And their elderly father, who their mother has passed away at the beginning of the book, their elderly father decides to marry a younger Ukrainian woman who has come across from the Ukraine, and her motives for marrying their father seem impure to them. So they have to, and these 2 sisters have been feuding for basically their whole lives, but they sort of have to put that aside to try and save their father from this woman who is called Valentina before it's too late. So this book had lots of layers to it, which I found really interesting. It covered some quite dark topics, but somehow it seemed to retain its sense of humour, which I really enjoyed. The way that the author portrays some of these characters was really fascinating to me, and I liked them. They were likeable to me. So this was a 4-star read for me as well. Very enjoyable, highly recommend. Okay, then we move on to Doppelganger, as alluded to earlier, and this is by Naomi Klein. It was the winner of the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction for this year. That was why I was reading it, because it was on the shortlist, and also I got a copy from the library. Now, as things went on, I decided to buy my own copy because it felt like the kind of book that I might refer to again and again, because it's sort of, so it's, the premise of the book is that Naomi Klein is often mistaken for another Naomi who writes books, and that is Naomi Wolf, and they have very different stances on science and yeah, so it's sort of, their paths have diverged over the years, and Naomi Klein sort of became somewhat obsessed with this this effect, and so she's sort of referring to Naomi Wolf as her doppelganger because they get mistaken for each other so often. So yeah, that was sort of the premise for the book, and then she sort of delves into what she calls the mirror world, which is sort of like the world outside your bubble, essentially, where there's all sorts of things going on that you're just not aware of. And so, yeah, it was a super interesting book. So she does deep dive on Naomi Wolf's career and sort of goes through the evolution of Naomi Wolf, who originally sort of came to prominence for writing, I believe it's called The Beauty Myth, or something along those lines, a book about beauty and sort of the male gaze and that sort of thing. And then, you know, so she sort of begins her career on the left and is now currently on the right, and the far right. So it's a really interesting sort of exploration of that evolution, as well as, and then she also kind of looks at the doppelganger in literature, in film, in culture, etc. I learned so much from this book. It had an interesting but slow start where it's sort of explaining all of the things about Naomi Wolf's career and this kind of like the doppelganger effect that is happening for Naomi Klein. It's necessary, but it's sort of like it took a little bit to get into. But the later chapters were really, really insightful about the broader topic of the doppelganger, and where it paralleled with Enter Ghost was she talks about the Israel-Palestine situation. Now, obviously this book was published before what's going on right now in the world, so it definitely doesn't incorporate what's currently happening, but it's a really interesting look at the sort of how things got to be where they were at the time of publishing. So super, super interesting. This was also a 4-star read for me. Loved it. Okay, moving on. So the next book that I finished was A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This was a short little book. It's only 150 pages or so. And this is a science fiction book, but I would say it sort of tends towards the cozy side of science fiction. So, the summary of it is that it's been centuries since the robots of Panga gained self-awareness and laid down their tools. Centuries since they wandered en masse. Centuries since they wandered en masse into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Centuries since they faded into myth and urban legend. One day, the life of a tea monk is upended by the arrival of a robot, there to honour the old promise of checking in. The robot cannot go back until the question of what do people need is answered, but the answer to that question depends on who you ask and how. So I really loved the characters in this book. We have Dex, the tea monk, and the concept of a tea monk. Love it. Would love that lifestyle. It sounds amazing. And also the robot, who is called Mosscap, is also delightful. The book felt a little bit quick to me, to be honest, and I sort of found it hard to visualize what was going on some of the time. So I think this, for me, would have worked better as an illustrated book. I would have loved some pictures to go along with what was happening in the book. So that would be my feedback. Make that happen. That would be amazing if we had an illustrated version of this series. But I particularly loved and would love to see a picture of the tea wagon and the abandoned hermitage, which sort of they go to later on in the book. But this was definitely also a 4-star read, so you can see I've had like a really good start to the month of June. Okay, the next book is actually a 5-star read, and that is Heartstopper Volume 1 by Alice Oseman, which is a graphic novel, and I would say is probably YA. So we have Charlie, who is a bit of a highly strung, openly gay overthinker, and then we have Nick, who is a cheerful, soft-hearted rugby player, and they meet at a British all-boys grammar school. A friendship blossoms, and then there's sort of this question of could there be more? Could there be something between them? So it was super, super wholesome. I loved it. I loved the characters. I loved their gentle trajectory of their relationship from acquaintances to friends to question mark, which is, I guess, to be explored in the next volume. I'm keen to read it. I'm very keen to read the rest of this series. Loved it. 5 stars from me. The next book that I finished is a book I read on audiobook, which is Salonica Birding by Gail Jones. This is a literary fiction book with an Australian author. So this is set in Greece, in the city of Salonika in 1917. And there is a big fire that happens. The entire city is engulfed in fire during the war. So it's sort of like a local disaster within this sort of greater context of the war. And we follow 4 characters, 2 of whom are Australian women, and then we have a British woman and a British man, who are based loosely on the lives of several real people. So one of those people is called Stella, and she's based on Miles Franklin, who's an Australian author. And then we've got some painters as well, who are the British people. So the author has taken liberties, so this is not entirely based on, she doesn't know whether these people actually met, but they did definitely all go to the area, so they were there. And then she's just kind of imagined the rest. So it took me a little while to see the female leads, because there are 3 female leads that we follow along, to see them as distinct from each other. So it was a bit tricky to get into it from that point of view, because their voices felt really similar at the beginning. And then eventually I sort of started to differentiate between the 3 of them. It was a good book, but it just didn't capture me in the way that I anticipated, so I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Then I read, it was a reread for me, and it was a 5-star reread, The Tea Dragon Society by Kate O'Neill, a graphic novel in the fantasy genre. And we follow the story of Greta, a blacksmith apprentice, and the people she meets as she becomes entwined in the enchanting world of tea dragons. So this is a really wholesome book. I've reviewed it numerous times on this channel, so I won't go into too much detail here, but so it was a delightful and wholesome reread as always. 5 stars. The reason I was rereading that one is because I wanted to read the 3rd book in the series, which is the Tea Dragon Tapestry, which I had not read before. And as I said, it's the 3rd book in the same series, and it sort of follows on a year after the events of the 1st book. The 2nd book is kind of it goes back in time, and I thought I wouldn't need to reread that one to read this one. It does refer to characters from that book though, so it probably would be worthwhile rereading that one as well, but I remembered them enough and it was okay. So essentially in this one, where it's, as I said, a year later, and Greta has been entrusted with the care of a tea dragon, and she is struggling to, so when a tea dragon's owner passes away or whatever, they can't look after them anymore, they go into, a tea dragon will go into mourning, and Greta has been given this tea dragon who used to belong to someone else, and this tea dragon remains in mourning, and Greta cannot work out how to get it out of that state and to start bonding with her as the new caretaker for this tea dragon. So she is, that's kind of like one of the threads of the story, and we also have one of the other characters, Minette, who receives a surprise package from the monastery where she was once training to be a prophetess. We find that out in the first book. And it sort of causes her to sort of have a bit of a moment of, not exactly crisis, but sort of like a identity crisis, I guess, in terms of the fact that she can't remember what happened when she was in her training, and sort of and integrate that with her life now, looking after a tea dragon. So that's sort of like the basic premise of this book. But again, this was super wholesome, lots of wholesome goodness in the tea dragon world. The characters are all delightful. It was lovely to revisit them again. And they're all lovely to each other. So this is very much in the cozy genre as well. Very low stakes, really. And I would like a tea dragon, please. Thank you, 5 stars. Okay, that was the last book for the month of June. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you've been able to hear me over the crashing waves. And I look forward to chatting to you on the next one soon. Bye!